The halls of Washington, D.C. had always been filled with whispers, but this time they were growing louder, too loud to ignore. Kash Patel, now serving as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation under President Donald Trump's second term, had become a force to be reckoned with. Known for his fearless approach, sharp intellect, and refusal to play the political game, Kash had built a reputation for being a man who didn't flinch even when staring down the most powerful people in the country. But nothing could have prepared Washington for what was coming. It started quietly. A routine audit within the FBI's cyber division flagged several irregular international transactions connected to a nonprofit based in Minnesota. What made this odd was that the flagged accounts were indirectly tied to campaign fundraising activities, ones that had been previously cleared. That's when the name Ilhan Omar first popped up. Initially, no one thought much of it. After all, Omar was no stranger to controversy, but she had managed to weather every storm. From her polarizing rhetoric to past questions about her personal life, she always came out the other side standing. But this was different. Kash Patel personally reviewed the flagged file, intrigued by the tangled web of financial trails. His instincts told him this wasn't just some accounting error, it was something more. Within a week, Kash had assembled a discreet team of FBI cyber experts, forensic accountants, and legal analysts. Their task? Quietly investigate the links between foreign entities, campaign contributions, and suspicious nonprofits in the Minnesota area. What they uncovered left them stunned. Thousands of dollars had been funneled through shadowy organizations based in Qatar, Somalia, and Turkey. These organizations claimed to be humanitarian in nature but had been on international watch lists for laundering money and facilitating soft influence operations in Western democracies. And somehow they were all sending funds indirectly but traceably to support Omar's political operations. Kash didn't make his move immediately. He knew that exposing this would send shockwaves through Congress and beyond. It had to be airtight, bulletproof. If he were to take down a sitting U.S. representative, especially one as vocal and politically protected as Ilhan Omar, he couldn't afford even a single loose end. Weeks turned into months. The operation was codenamed Project Sentinel. With each passing day, more connections surfaced: cryptic communications, encrypted emails, private meetings with foreign nationals on U.S. soil. Even more alarming, there were hints that Omar had met with individuals tied to international lobbying efforts that were never disclosed under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA. That was a direct violation of federal law. Still, Kash kept it quiet. Not even the White House knew the full extent of the investigation. But that was all about to change. One chilly Tuesday morning in March, Patel stood in front of a secure conference room packed with top federal officials and senior White House legal counsel. The walls were lined with documents, timelines, redacted emails, and financial maps showing a complicated web that connected foreign agents, shell companies, and a sitting U.S. representative. Kash pointed to the center of the web. This, he said firmly, is Ilhan Omar. And what we have here is career-ending. The room fell into stunned silence. A storm was coming. And Kash Patel was standing right in the eye of it. Inside the FBI's Counterintelligence Operations Center, a special server room buzzed with activity. This wasn't a standard investigation anymore. This was rapidly evolving into one of the most explosive political scandals in modern American history. Kash Patel was no longer just chasing financial anomalies. Now he was unraveling a case of potential foreign influence at the highest levels of government. As Project Sentinel advanced, a key breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a whistleblower. A former employee of one of the nonprofits in Minneapolis had reached out anonymously, providing access to an internal email server. The emails revealed discussions among board members about strategic political contributions and returns on influence. One email, dated just before the 2022 midterms, read, "Our donations must result in policy leverage. Congresswoman Omar is essential to that pipeline." It was written by a foreign national currently residing in Istanbul with known ties to the Turkish intelligence community. The implications were staggering. The emails also hinted that certain legislative efforts pushed by Omar, such as relaxed oversight on foreign remittances and softer immigration vetting for specific regions, had direct beneficiaries overseas. These were not merely ideological positions, they were potentially favors in exchange for covert support. Kash ordered around-the-clock monitoring of all individuals tied to the case, including those working in Omar's Minnesota offices. He didn't want leaks. He needed to protect the integrity of the investigation, but he also needed to act before anyone could start deleting evidence or fleeing the country. Then came the real bombshell, a recorded Zoom call. An FBI cyber analyst had uncovered a deleted recording stored on a third-party cloud server. It featured a virtual meeting between Omar's campaign treasurer, a foreign nonprofit executive, and an unidentified man with a heavy accent. The conversation was coded but clear enough for analysts to decode. "She will table the amendment. You wire the remainder by the 20th. And after the vote, expect a shift in posture," she's assured us. The language wasn't just suggestive, it screamed quid pro quo. Kash Patel knew they had crossed the line from political controversy into criminal territory. He called a closed-door meeting with the Department of Justice's top prosecutors. As FBI director, he couldn't bring charges himself, but he could hand over airtight evidence. And that's exactly what he did. In that meeting, Kash laid out the entire investigation like a prosecutor building a case. "We have documented evidence of undeclared foreign meetings, financial flows that bypassed FEC scrutiny, and communications that strongly suggest coordinated policy for money schemes," he told them. "This isn't just about campaign violations. This is espionage-adjacent behavior. At best, it's willful foreign lobbying. At worst, it's treason-adjacent." The DOJ was stunned. Even senior officials, hardened by decades of DC politics, sat in silence for several moments before one finally whispered, "How far does this go?" Kash didn't blink. "Far enough that if we don't act, it will destroy what little credibility federal law still has." The question now was no longer if Omar would face consequences, but how soon. The White House had been briefed. President Trump, flanked by legal advisors and Chief of Staff Caroline Leavitt, listened intently as Kash laid out the findings. After a long silence, Trump leaned back and said, "Make it public. The American people deserve to know." That was the green light. Kash Patel was going to expose it all, live, on national television. The next morning, every major news outlet received a short, cryptic media alert. FBI Director Kash Patel to hold emergency national briefing at 11 a.m. Hoover Building, D.C. attendance strongly advised. Speculation exploded across social media. Was it a terror threat? A new cyber attack? Something to do with Russia? No one had any idea what was coming. But insiders close to the White House knew, and they were already bracing for impact. By the time 11 o'clock rolled around, the press conference room was overflowing. Journalists from CNN, Fox, MSNBC, The New York Times, even international outlets like Al Jazeera and the BBC packed the seats. The room buzzed with energy, tension, and an eerie sense of impending chaos. Then Kash Patel stepped up to the podium, flanked by FBI legal counsel and two high-ranking Department of Justice officials. He didn't waste time. "Good morning. Over the last 9 months, the FBI has conducted a covert investigation into unlawful foreign influence operations within the United States government. This investigation, Project Sentinel, has uncovered credible evidence that a sitting member of Congress, Representative Ilhan Omar, has been involved in a complex web of financial misconduct, undisclosed foreign contacts, and potential violations of federal law." The room froze. Cameras clicked. Reporters gasped. Some began typing furiously on laptops while others just stared, stunned. Patel continued with measured confidence. "We have uncovered a network of foreign entities linked to regimes in Turkey, Somalia, and Qatar who funneled funds through nonprofits and shell corporations that ultimately benefited Representative Omar's political operations. These funds were not disclosed to the FEC. Some were intentionally hidden. Others were routed through third-party organizations under the guise of humanitarian donations." Screens behind Patel lit up, showing redacted documents, emails, and wire transfers. The evidence was overwhelming. "Our cyber team has intercepted communications between Omar's campaign staff and foreign agents. These communications suggest a deliberate and illegal exchange of political favors for financial and lobbying support. This includes a now-recovered video conference in which strategic votes in Congress were discussed in exchange for donations." Gasps echoed throughout the room. Even seasoned political journalists used to mudslinging and scandal were visibly shaken. No one expected it to be this detailed, this organized, or this explosive. Then Kash dropped the biggest bombshell yet. Furthermore, our investigation revealed that Representative Omar failed to disclose multiple private meetings with foreign nationals flagged by U.S. intelligence agencies as potential operatives or affiliates of foreign governments. These meetings were not declared, and some occurred in direct violation of travel and disclosure laws. He paused, then added with gravity. Let me be absolutely clear. No member of Congress, no matter their party, popularity, or position, is above the law. This office does not play politics. We follow the facts. And the facts in this case are deeply troubling. He stepped back. The room erupted in a frenzy of questions. Is she being charged? Will she be arrested? Is this treason? Is the White House involved? But Kash didn't flinch. We have referred all evidence to the Department of Justice. It is now in their hands to pursue criminal prosecution. As of this moment, Representative Omar's security clearance is suspended and a formal ethics investigation in Congress has been requested. Ilhan Omar, watching the broadcast from her D.C. office, sat frozen. Her staff scrambled around her. Phones rang nonstop. Emails flooded in. The political storm had landed squarely on her doorstep. Within minutes, #Ilhan Omar trended across all platforms. But for the first time, the tide wasn't in her favor. Supporters were confused. Detractors were emboldened. Her colleagues in Congress? Silent. Kash Patel had just pulled the pin on a political grenade. And Washington, D.C. was still trying to figure out if it could recover from the blast. The fallout was immediate. Within 24 hours of Kash Patel's bombshell press conference, Capitol Hill felt like a war zone of political chaos. Congressional Democrats scrambled to issue vague statements urging patience and due process, while Republicans seized the moment like hawks. Speaker of the House, Byron Donalds, announced that the Ethics Committee would convene an emergency hearing regarding Ilhan Omar's conduct. Simultaneously, Senator J.D. Vance called for a Senate Intelligence Subcommittee to review potential security breaches linked to her unauthorized meetings with foreign nationals. Even members of Omar's own party, quietly behind closed doors, began to distance themselves. Cable news turned into a 24-hour firestorm. Tucker Carlson returned for a special guest appearance on Fox News, while Rachel Maddow attempted damage control on MSNBC. On CNN, analysts debated whether this was a smear campaign or the most damning political scandal since Watergate. But Kash Patel? He wasn't celebrating. Behind the scenes, he knew how fragile things were. He wasn't just fighting one congresswoman. He was fighting a network, a powerful alliance of foreign interests, political operatives, and legacy media outlets that would stop at nothing to protect their own. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, protests erupted. Some gathered in support of Omar, claiming she was being targeted for her ethnicity, religion, and political views. But others, particularly local Somali Americans and moderate Democrats, voiced betrayal. We voted for Ilhan because she said she was for the people, one community leader told reporters. But now it looks like she was for herself and worse, for foreign powers. Back in Washington, the Department of Justice quietly began forming a grand jury. Omar had not yet been charged, but insiders knew that was about to change. More disturbing revelations came to light in the days that followed. One internal memo, uncovered by the FBI, revealed that Omar's former chief of staff had flagged concerns about unusual donors back in 2021, but his email had gone unanswered. He was later reassigned. Another uncovered text message from a foreign agent read, "We need her to kill the amendment. Turkey is watching closely. Delay the vote if needed. Wire transfer is pending." It was becoming clear, Omar had not just violated campaign finance rules, she had allegedly used her congressional influence to shift U.S. foreign policy. Kash Patel held another closed-door session with DOJ officials. The FBI's findings had reached a point where inaction would amount to complicity. "We've presented an ironclad case," he told Attorney General Pam Bondi. "We cannot let this be buried." Pam nodded grimly. "You did your part, Kash. Now it's time for ours." Late that Friday night, news broke that Omar's passport had been flagged. Federal authorities were preparing for the possibility she might flee the country. She was now under full federal surveillance, and whispers began swirling that an arrest warrant could be imminent. Kash Patel, reflecting on the whirlwind of events, confided to one of his closest advisors. "This isn't just about Omar. This is about who else was involved, who else is compromised. I don't think we've scratched the surface yet." He was right. Behind the scenes, the FBI had opened auxiliary investigations into multiple staffers and political donors tied to Omar's campaigns, some of whom had connections reaching far beyond U.S. borders. As the days unfolded, the story morphed from a scandal to a full-blown national security crisis. And the man who had dared to expose it all? Kash Patel. Calm, unshaken, and resolute, he had just changed the course of American politics. But the final act was yet to come. It was a Monday morning when the final domino fell. At 6:45 a.m., federal agents from the FBI's Washington field office executed a sealed warrant at Representative Ilhan Omar's D.C. townhouse. The moment was historic. Never in modern American history had a sitting member of Congress been taken into custody under suspicion of acting on behalf of foreign interests. Cable news helicopters swarmed overhead as black SUVs rolled up. The footage was shocking. Omar, wearing a gray hoodie and visibly shaken, was led out of her home in handcuffs. No words were exchanged. Her attorney stood nearby, stone-faced. Kash Patel wasn't present. He didn't need to be. His work had already been done. He was back at the Hoover Building, briefing the National Security Council on additional findings that pointed to similar foreign influence networks potentially targeting other members of Congress. This wasn't just one case, Kash told the president's team. This was a test run. Ilhan Omar was the pilot program. There's a larger play here, possibly involving an international strategy to insert soft power into our legislative process. The case against Omar now had multiple fronts. Federal campaign violations. The financial trail was undeniable. Shell nonprofits funneled hundreds of thousands into campaign operations in clear violation of FEC laws. Unregistered foreign lobbying. Omar had met privately with foreign agents and accepted policy direction without disclosing these meetings under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA. National security violations. She had used unsecured devices to communicate with flagged individuals overseas, potentially exposing classified committee deliberations. Obstruction of justice. There was evidence she instructed staff to wipe devices and destroy emails once whispers of the investigation reached her ears. Ilhan Omar's legal team immediately began a media blitz, claiming the charges were politically motivated and that she was being targeted for her ethnicity and religion. But the facts spoke louder than talking points. The Department of Justice unsealed a 42-page indictment just 3 days later. In a rare and powerful statement, Attorney General Pam Bondi said, "This is not a prosecution rooted in politics. This is a defense of our Constitution, our sovereignty, and the rule of law. No public servant, no matter how high, can trade national loyalty for personal gain." The House Ethics Committee unanimously voted to suspend Omar pending the outcome of the investigation. Privately, even her staunchest allies in the Progressive Caucus had gone silent. There were no rallies, no public outcries, just a stunned silence across Washington. Even President Trump, known for his blunt commentary, responded with rare seriousness. "This is one of the worst betrayals of the American people I've seen. I commend Director Patel and the FBI for doing what others were too afraid to do." Meanwhile, Kash Patel had become a household name overnight. For many Americans, he was the no-nonsense lawman who finally brought accountability back to Washington. For others, especially those tied to the old guard, he was dangerous because he couldn't be controlled. But Kash didn't care about legacy or politics. His focus remained on justice. In a quiet interview with a conservative podcast weeks later, he summed it up with the same clarity he had shown throughout the entire storm. "I didn't go looking for Ilhan Omar. I went looking for the truth. And once we found it, we followed it no matter where it led. That's what the American people deserve. The full truth." Ilhan Omar's trial would dominate the headlines for months. But her political career was already over. Donors fled. Allies vanished. Her seat in Congress, once a fortress of progressive politics, was now a battlefield. And the man who exposed it all? He returned to his office the next day like it was any other. Because for Kash Patel, justice wasn't a performance. It was a duty.